I'm Mike.
I'm Sam. Let's get into it.
Matteau swoops in to intercept. Matteau behind the net. Swings it in front. He scores! Matteau! Matteau! Matteau!
Welcome to episode 17. So today's episode, we're going to talk about championships. So if the circumstances of this year weren't happening right now, the coronavirus wasn't around, we would be in the probably the start of the NBA Finals and the Stanley Cup Finals. So it just had me thinking about some of the past championships that happened and what makes a championship run so magical. If there's any weight around the championship, like a drought, or there's some spectacular performances. So the first question I'm going to ask you, Michael, is when you think about a championship, what is the first one that comes to mind? And you can any sport, football, basketball, baseball, hockey.
Yeah, so when I think about great championships and just great championship runs in general, first thing I think about is I think about teams with a great player or players in a year filled with great matchups and games, along with a great storyline behind that team, behind those players that team has, and just behind the season in a whole. And then getting to the championship to overcome all odds to win, which then cements that team and the players on that team's legacy forever. So when I think about all those things considered, the first team I think about with great championships is the 2016 Cavaliers. So the 2016 Cavaliers team, they're coming off of a finals loss in 2015 to the Warriors, who were a great team in that series. You know, you had Kevin Love go down with an injury in a couple series before against the Celtics with Kelly Oubre dislocating his elbow. Then you have Kyrie Irving getting hurt in game one of that Warriors series. So we never really got to see the Cavaliers at full strength. So going into next season, there's a great storyline with not only could the Warriors repeat championships and could they cement their legacy as a great team, and it wasn't just a fluke, but you also have LeBron trying to lift his team up to a championship. He hasn't won any championships since he left the Miami Heat super team, and kind of the view of him was at a very low point at that time. So getting into the season, Golden State capped off a great series and just a great season before, with going on to have the best record in NBA history, going 73-9, breaking all these records. They were the first team to break over 1,000 three-pointers made in a season. They had the best start to a season ever with a 24-0 start with Luke Walton as their head coach during that stretch, actually, with Steve Kerr out for personal health reasons. They also had the longest regular season home win streak ever, stretching into their last season and going into this season with 54 wins, which is just absolutely incredible. And you have a back-to-back MVP and first unanimous MVP ever on their team in Steph Curry. So the Golden State Warriors just had an absolute incredible season, along with Kobe's last year, really just outshadowed what the Cavaliers did that season, which they also had a really great season. But getting into the NBA Finals series that year, they jumped out to a 2-0 lead, and the Warriors recorded the largest margin of victory throughout the two first Finals games ever, with a total margin of victory of 48. So I just remember watching that Cavs team. They just looked defeated, and the Warriors were just on top of the world, best regular season team ever. They were going to cement themselves to be the best team ever, even better than the 96 Bulls, which is just absolutely incredible. And then Draymond Green gets suspended, and they end up being the first team to come back from a 3-1 deficit ever. They were the first team to also win an away game in Game 7 since 1978. First professional sports team to win in Cleveland since 1964, and just everything that went along with that series was just great, made it great. And when you think about just great championships that hold a lot of weight, those 2016 Cavaliers championship run is the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah, I mean, that was just an outstanding series. I think one of the best pictures in all of basketball is LeBron James just like sitting on the sideline with he has sunglasses on and beats, and there's just the caption under it that no team has ever come back from a 3-1 lead, and that's just one of the best pictures I think in sports. But you see that the Warriors had such a smooth season. They were a championship before. They had the best record of all time in the regular season, and the Cavs, they finished first in the East, but that wasn't. They really had some ups and downs in the season. They
Yeah.
David Blatt halfway through the season, and they had Tyronn Lue become the interim head coach. So it wasn't a smooth finish to the whole season. It was very rocky, but you saw they were able to get to the finals, and LeBron just a lot of spectacular moments in that series. And I think that's really what makes a finals or a championship so great, is having like spectacular moments. If you think about a series or a game, you can name like 5 moments off your hand. That's what makes it so great. So you have the Kyrie shot at the end. You have obviously the block. You have LeBron blocking Steph Curry and looking back at him.
Yep.
And just having those great moments make it such a great series.
Yeah, LeBron James also in that series. When you asked the question, which series do you think about first? Which team do you think about first? And I kind of listed off some of my criteria. You need to have a great player just cement his legacy in that series, and that's what LeBron really did. His legacy really was up for question before this series. He'd only won 2 finals after being in the finals for 5 times in a row. That was his 6th final in a row, so he really needed to win that one. His finals record would have looked really ugly if he lost this series, but again, going down 2-0, winning the next game, then losing the next game, so being down 3-1, he responded to that with back-to-back 41-point games in Game 5 and 6, and then he ended up having a triple-double in Game 7. And LeBron is the first and only player in NBA history in a single series to lead both teams in total points, assists, rebounds, steals, and blocks. So a great offensive and defensive performance by LeBron James, really just cementing a great player's legacy to be undoubtedly, in my opinion, the second greatest player of all time.
Yeah, I mean, his first stint with Cleveland, he dragged a very poor roster to the finals, and they obviously lost that. Then he went to the Miami Heat, and he became sort of the villain of the league. But when he came back to the Cavs and being able to win this championship, he put the city of Cleveland on his back. He put the whole team on his back, and finally being able to win this championship. And you see with a lot of championships, especially the Warriors, they knew they were going to win each year, so you saw them. Obviously, they were happy, having smiles on your face. But you saw when LeBron won this, he actually broke down in tears in Kevin Love's arms, which just showed how important this title was to him.
Yeah, just so much weight behind this finals. Him being the chosen one, him growing up in Akron, Ohio, having all these accolades throughout high school, throughout his youth playing basketball, getting drafted by his hometown team, promising to bring back a championship to Cleveland, never doing it, leaving Cleveland, the whole city hating him, and then just this kind of awkward just rekindling of a relationship between a city and an organization and a player to eventually win their first championship in their history of their organization. So LeBron James, I mean, he was born on this earth with the goal to win a championship for Cleveland. And when he finally did that, he even said in his mind he was the greatest player of all time after that Cleveland championship. So, I mean, one of the greatest underdog stories of all time in a final series that we'll get into. So just incredible series. Definitely the first one that jumps off in my mind when you think of just great teams, great players, and great championships.
Yeah. So I'm gonna talk about the one that first comes to my mind. Obviously, I think a lot of people, when you ask them what type of championship first comes to mind, I think a lot of them will say kind of their favorite team or their favorite player winning a championship.
Yeah.
But for me, that's not the case. I'm gonna go with the Giants, the first Giants-Patriots Super Bowl.
Yep.
Kind of as a young football fan, I was only around 7 years old, so this was kind of my first memory of watching football on TV. Obviously, my Colts won the Super Bowl the year before, but I kind of have no recollection of that at all.
Yeah.
But my dad and my brother were huge Giants fans, so obviously we watched the playoff. We watched the team the whole year, but just the Giants were road warriors. They were a wild card team, and they had to go on the road against a hot Tampa Bay, in which the weather was 90 degrees.
Yeah.
Dallas, and then they had to go to Green Bay, which was one of the coldest games on record. So obviously you see this underdog team that was 10-6, wild card, go on the road for 3 consecutive games and winning all 3 of them.
Yep.
Just insane. And then obviously the storyline of the Patriots being 16-0, going for the perfect season. Maybe we'll get into the Dolphins later on, but the Dolphins are the only team to go undefeated throughout the whole year. But the Patriots were going through trying to complete a perfect season through this year. And every game, the Patriots went through. They blew the teams out of the water. I think it was, I don't know if it's the record, but they had to have averaged probably the most points, if not top 5 for a team throughout a single season.
Yep.
Then week 17, the Giants and the Patriots faced, and this was the closest game the Patriots had all season, only winning by 3 points. You kind of saw the writing on the wall that the Giants had a great defense. They had a backfield with Brandon Jacobs and Ahmad Bradshaw that were going to ground and pound. So just having running the ball and defense really showed how hard this team was going to play in the playoffs. So now obviously they went to the Super Bowl. And like I said before, you had to have those memorable moments in the Super Bowl. So you have in the same play, you have Eli Manning eluding that sack, and you have him chucking it down the field, and David Tyree catching on his helmet. And it's just, you have those spectacular moments in this Super Bowl, and it's one of the, if not the greatest, actually I wouldn't say if the greatest underdog story ever, because the USA Olympic hockey, that's the greatest underdog. But this is one of the greatest underdog stories in all of sports, and it was just insane to watch.
Yeah, certainly the biggest Super Bowl upset in Super Bowl history. I mean, just incredible. What makes this run so incredible by the Giants is that the last 3 teams they beat in the postseason, they lost to them in the regular season. They lost to the Cowboys twice in the regular season by 11 points or more in both of those games. So the Cowboys had their number in the regular season. On top of the division, they were just a better team that year in the regular season. Then the Packers as well. They got blown out by the Packers in week 2 of that season. So for Tom Coughlin, Eli Manning, and all those veteran players to rally up the troops coming into the playoffs, coming off of a really great wild card victory against the Bucs, and say, I know we lost to the Cowboys twice in the regular season, but we could do this, we can overcome this, to beat the Cowboys at home, and then to beat the Packers, another team, again, they got blown out by in the regular season, to beat them, to go to the Super Bowl against an 18-0 juggernaut team that have already won 3 Super Bowls with their head coach and quarterback, to face Tom Brady, who set the touchdown passing record that year, and to face Randy Moss, who set the touchdown reception record that year. I mean, again, to a team even though played extremely tough, like you said, writing was on the wall in that 38-35 loss that they suffered to the Patriots in Week 17. But just to come into that Super Bowl with supreme confidence in yourself, when statistically at the time they were the worst team to ever win the Super Bowl. So just to come into the Super Bowl knowing all of that and to still come out as victors, I mean, again, it's one of the biggest underdog stories in all of sports history, and just an absolutely fantastical Cinderella run by the Giants that year.
Yeah, I think the Giants use a game plan, and you kind of can see this in a lot of the Patriots playoff losses. The Broncos use it too, that they had a phenomenal pass rush, and they just kept hitting Brady and hitting Brady. I mean, the Giants had Michael Strahan, they had Osi Umenyiora, they had Matthias Kiwanuka. So they just had, and then later on you saw the Broncos with Von Miller, DeMarcus Ware in the AFC Championship. But they had those players, and they were able to just hit Brady and applying them that pressure on him. Kind of, that's where he falls apart in some aspects of his game. Yeah.
Yeah, Justin Tuck as well to round out that just incredible Giants defensive line. I mean, they're a team that they underachieved in the regular season, and I think that helped them because they were frustrated by, even though they were a great team, this Giants team, they really just did not live up to their potential in the regular season. I know a lot of players were banged up. Plaxico Burress, their leading wide receiver, was banged up for most of that season. But, I mean, really, I think the turning point of the season is when you touch upon that Week 17 loss to the Patriots. They had already cemented their place as the 5th seed. There was no chance of them winning the division. So they're already set in stone with what was going to happen with their playoff fate, really, going into those playoffs. But Tom Coughlin said, I can either rest my starters or I could push them and play them and just try to gain momentum going into the postseason. That's exactly what they did. Like you said, playing the Patriots to their toughest regular season game. I mean, and just second toughest game all season they played. Obviously, the first one being the Super Bowl, in which they lost. But, I mean, just for us to walk away from this great Patriots 20-year run of dominating the NFL, to walk away from that and say in their best season they did not win the Super Bowl because of that Giants team really just cements the Giants team as one of the greatest teams in NFL history.
Yeah, and then obviously, what is it? 4 years later, they win another Super Bowl against the Patriots. So it just shows that they had a similar play style, not a similar roster. Kind of evolved. Justin Tuck kind of became that Michael Strahan role as the leader on the defense, but they evolved and they were able to beat the Patriots again with a similar scheme.
Yeah, 4 years later, they actually became the statistically worst to this day, the worst team to ever win the Super Bowl. They actually came into that later 2012 Super Bowl with being the only team ever to even make a Super Bowl where your opponents have scored more points than you total on the season than you have scored against them. So, I mean, these great, just Giants, Eli Manning-led underdog teams really just have cemented their legacy as some of the greatest teams in NFL history. And without these two Super Bowls, we really wouldn't be talking about Eli Manning in the light that we do today.
Yeah, I mean, winning these Super Bowls creates the argument of whether Eli Manning is a Hall of Famer or not, even with the stats that he has, and they're pretty average or below average stats. So hats off to him being able to win 2 Super Bowls and creating that argument.
Yeah, and I mean, really just a kind of stark contrast between his brother Peyton, who has had such great regular season success, documented as one of the greatest regular season quarterbacks of all time, and has struggled at times in the playoffs. But then you have his brother, where he struggled in the regular season, struggled to kind of captivate his teams and get to the postseason. But once he gets to the postseason, Eli Manning has proven time in and time out, even in playoff games in which they've lost, even in playoffs where they didn't reach the Super Bowl, he's proven time in and time out to be a great playoff quarterback.
Yeah, why'd you have to bring up Peyton?
I'm sorry. It's just, I mean, we wouldn't even, Eli Manning and Peyton Manning, it would be laughable to put them even in the same sentence, but now it's not laughable because of these 2 Super Bowls that have cemented Eli Manning's legacy, because without them, Eli Manning is, I mean, forgotten in NFL history, in my opinion, to just be Peyton Manning's brother, but instead he has as many Super Bowl rings as Peyton Manning. I would say both of which more significant than both of Peyton Manning's Super Bowl wins. I believe Eli Manning played better in both Super Bowls that Peyton Manning won. So, I mean, just with these 2 Super Bowls, we can put him into the conversation with his brother, maybe not in terms of legacy, but just even to put them in the same conversation just really means and just quantifies how much these Super Bowls really mean.
Yeah. I mean, Peyton, obviously one of the best, I think, top 2 quarterback of all time, top 3, I may argue. First best quarterback of all times, others may argue. But obviously 2 Super Bowls, and 2 of those Super Bowl wins aren't the best. You know, we had the Broncos versus the Panthers, and obviously he didn't win MVP. It was the last season of his career.
Yeah.
And then the Bears cult where it was raining. Peyton, I mean, I watched the game. Peyton drove them down the field a lot, but they kind of just stalled in the red zone for multiple drives, so that kind of hurt his legacy. But obviously, you have him playing the Saints and the Seahawks and losing both. And I think kind of the Seahawks-Broncos Super Bowl is very important for the kind of the history of the NFL.
Yeah.
Because you have the best offense, the best defense. Peyton had, without doubt, the best regular season a quarterback can ever have, breaking the touchdown record, breaking the passing yards record, and just going to the Super Bowl and getting absolutely destroyed. And this was kind of like the birth of the Seahawks. I mean, they could have been, I think without the Patriots the next year, they could have been a dynasty. I think they could have won 2. Obviously, could have won 2, but maybe even 3 and gone on to win more. But obviously, you see them winning 48-3 in one of the largest margins of victory in the Super Bowl. And even though it was a blowout, you have some of those moments that make people just remember about. You have obviously the first play, the snap going over Peyton Manning, just kind of a symbol just to show how big how bad this game was going to be. You have Percy Harvin returning the kick. You have Malcolm Smith, who became the MVP of the Super Bowl, picking Peyton off for pick 6. And obviously, it's not a popular Super Bowl, a lot of people say that's the worst Super Bowl ever, but there's those moments just to show how important it was in the status of championships.
Yeah, it really was important. And getting into a Super Bowl, you alluded to Super Bowl 49, which really was a precursor to the next Super Bowls we'd see out of the Patriots, and even a precursor to some of those Seahawks seasons after it. We saw kind of the Seahawks riding high after that Broncos Super Bowl, which is significant. But then going into this Super Bowl, Super Bowl 49, which I think carries a lot of weight in terms of significance, in terms of the grand scheme in the NFL as well. The Patriots at that point, it's hard to believe, but it had been exactly 10 years since they won a Super Bowl. So they're on a decade-long Super Bowl drought, the Patriots of their own, really just a decade of being great, having a stronghold on not only their division, but the AFC in general. I mean, they really went to, I believe, 5 AFC championship games in that time, 2 Super Bowls, but really haven't been able to captivate that early 2000s magic that they did have. And they were down 10 points going into the fourth quarter against this team, again, who was a potential dynasty, and the Patriots really stopped a potential dynasty from starting and started their own another 3 Super Bowl win dynasty in 5 years when Malcolm Butler intercepted the ball at the 1-yard line to win the game. Again, a game with so many just great plays, so many legacy-defining plays. Not only do you have Malcolm Butler intercepting the ball at the 1-yard line, but just before that, you have Malcolm Butler giving up a huge gain to Jermaine Kearse to even get them into that field position. So I think Super Bowl 49, it's a really great Super Bowl, but I think it's very significant because Tom Brady really just started cementing himself as the best quarterback of all time.
Yeah, with that Super Bowl, you have the Jermaine Kearse, and a lot of Patriots fans are probably holding their breath because obviously with the 2 Super Bowls against the Giants, you had David Tyree, and then you had the Mario Manningham over the shoulder. Yep. So a lot of people saw that freak play with Jermaine Kearse, and they're probably like, oh, we're going to lose this game. But then obviously tides turned, everything flipped around when the interception by Malcolm Butler, just showing, kind of just restarting the Patriots dynasty 2.0, like you said.
Yeah, and it really ushered in the Russell Wilson era of the Seahawks team. I think it was really significant not giving the ball to Marshawn Lynch, not only because it cost them to lose the game, but it kind of transitioned the Seahawks team into a defensive team. We're going to win by running the ball down your throat and playing great defense, to we're going to start to transition into being a pass-first team, into a team that we're going to win on Russell Wilson's shoulders week in and week out. And I think that exact play is the play you can pinpoint the transition from that great defensive team to Russell Wilson's team. So I think that was really significant for the grand scheme of the NFL going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I saw, like, kind of going back to the final play, or not the final play of the game, but obviously the Malcolm Butler interception.
Yep.
On an interview with Marshawn Lynch saying that when the play came in, everybody just looked at him and he just started laughing, and he just knew like it was over, because no way this slant route on the 3-yard line is going to work again, rather than handing the ball to the most physical running back in probably league history.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most baffling play calls in sports history by Pete Carroll. I know there was so much footage of Malcolm Butler and the Patriots practicing that exact same play. And in that exact same play in practice, Malcolm Butler kept getting beat on that pick play type slant that the Seahawks did eventually end up running and losing to. So that really just highlights such great preparation that the Patriots have had over the past 2 decades, that really highlight how great they are, because Malcolm Butler was a practice squad cornerback going into that year. I mean, he was really a nobody until that Super Bowl happened, and you have him just time in and time out in practice failing at that play. When it comes to the real game, he recognized, oh my God, this is a slant route, jumps the slant route, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and then obviously you have one of the saddest / greatest sound bites in NFL history, with Pete Carroll just going, oh no, and just crumbling to the ground.
Yeah, I mean, big meme. And you have a great moment by Rob Gronkowski too after they did have that interception. Like, this is the last play of the game. I'm just gonna for the last play of the game, I'm going to just throw some haymakers. So when Michael Bennett kind of went off sides, which really started, that really ended the game. The Seahawks still had a great chance to win that game with the Patriots backed up on their own 2-yard line. They could have had a safety gone on to win that game, but with Michael Bennett really having the moment maybe being too big and just I think his frustrations just taking out on it, that was also a great moment that really made up that Super Bowl.
Yeah, it just kind of shows the undisciplined play style of the Seahawks because they saw a huge opportunity. They could have got the safety, got the ball back, drove down the field, and potentially won that Super Bowl. It's just crazy. But speaking of kind of the Patriots are in the Dynasty 2.0, I want to go to the NBA, back to the NBA and kind of the Bulls. The 1996 Bulls beating the Supersonics and kind of starting their Dynasty 2.0 again. So obviously Michael Jordan, the year before he played a extremely short number of games because he came back from baseball. Yep. They lost to the Magic, and then obviously this year, Michael Jordan just grinded all off season. You saw in Space Jam, he kind of had he would have NBA players come to the Space Jam facility and play pickup games. So he just kind of just scouted talent all off season, grind all season, and you saw them get to the finals. And it's just insane that Michael Jordan missed 2 years or kind of 1 year and 3/4 of the year of the next year, but Jordan came back for a full season and they had the best record up until the Warriors of all time, and they just being able to miss 2 seasons and then coming back and having the best record of all time is just insane, and then let alone being able to win the finals as well, just having kind of just one of the greatest, probably the greatest season of all time for any team.
Yeah, they had the best 3-loss start to an NBA season ever at 41-3. They started 37-0 at home, which was at the time an NBA record, which the 2016 Warriors, as we kind of stated, ended up breaking. But just such an incredible season by Michael Jordan. Obviously, again, like you said, coming off of his little hiatus from the NBA, I think it was really important for Michael Jordan and Michael Jordan's legacy to reinstate him into the league and just restate that he is the best player on the planet and the NBA world revolves around him. He knows that the Rockets, which we'll get into one of the Rockets series a little bit later, but the Rockets had won back-to-back championships, so they weren't the best team going into the NBA anymore. So just to really recapture that title for the Chicago Bulls and to really cement himself as the best player of all time, I believe, in that season was just fantastic. The greatest player of all time leading the greatest team of all time to just the greatest championship of all time is definitely very significant.
Yeah, and then this season kind of ushers in the new Bulls. It wasn't like John Paxson or Horace Grant anymore. It was Steve Kerr, Tony Kukoc, Dennis Rodman. So it was kind of it was Michael and Scottie and then the new group from the previous 3 championships they won. But a lot of people look over the fact that the Sonics went 64-18, which is just an incredible record too. And even the Sonics on their whole roster, none of their players average over 20 points, which is also crazy. Just showing how they were just a really team-oriented team, kind of repetitive, but they had defense and they just moved the ball around a lot between their whole roster.
Yeah, really interesting coaching strategy to not have Gary Payton guard Michael Jordan for the first couple games in that series. And then once Gary Payton, who he always says he was injured, which he was injured at the time slightly, then switch on to Michael Jordan and cause Michael Jordan to, he still got his numbers, but just have a less efficient series when Gary Payton did switch on to him. Yeah. For them just to overcome all that still, just for certain holds a lot of weight. And getting into Michael Jordan a little bit, I know it's a little off topic, and that Bulls season, I saw recently that Scottie Pippen is livid over The Last Dance and said 90% of it is false. So I'm really looking forward to rewatching that entire series with you and really reviewing that in a later podcast episode. But these Chicago Bulls teams and these years that they won are definitely very significant not only for Michael Jordan's legacy, but just for the NBA in general. Without Michael Jordan, we could be talking about a world without the NBA because they were a organization and just a business that was kind of struggling, definitely from the 70s, but without that Magic and Bird presence in the league, they needed that new king to take over the league. So Michael Jordan, in his greatest season ever, taking over the league and just cementing himself again as the greatest player ever in the season was just very significant.
Yeah, and then obviously after the finals, it's on Father's Day or near Father's Day, and he just collapsed in the locker room after the finals crying because obviously it was the first title he won since his father was murdered.
Yeah.
There's a big moment in that too.
Yeah, certainly. So getting into another season we just kind of alluded to is the finals season before the 96 Bulls, and that was the 1995 Rockets. And I think this was a very significant championship run because not only were the Rockets coming off of a championship, but they really, despite that, were underdogs all playoffs, which we've never really seen a former championship team be an underdog all season, really. They started off the season really great, but then they were just really slow the rest of the season. They had really bad injuries. They ended up trading for Clyde Drexler halfway through the year, and they really just limped to the playoffs on the back of Hakeem Olajuwon. And they ended up getting into the playoffs as the 6th seed, so nobody really thought that the Houston Rockets were going to make any noise that season. Everybody thought the NBA Finals were really up for grabs, and then they really just cemented their legacy as one of the greatest teams of all time by being the first and only team to ever beat 450-win teams in the playoffs. So just playoff series after playoff series, they're facing the Nuggets, the Spurs, just great teams that they had to overcome. They ended up playing the Magic in the finals. They ended up sweeping the Magic in the finals. They also set a playoff record of 9 away game wins in this playoffs. So, I mean, just like the Giants, they were underdogs and they were the away team in every single series going into it, and they just ended up coming up on top with, again, a great player in Hakeem and cementing his legacy.
Yeah, I think another kind of, if you can create like a tier of championships, there's kind of like that underdog tier with the Giants, and then obviously these Rockets. Just not having home court advantage for every series they played in is an extreme accomplishment because they just have to. The first 2 games of a series are like kind of the most important games of the series because if you start off 0-2, it's going to be hard to come back from that. So being able to go into the opponent's building and winning games and continue to move on to the next round and move on to the next round, and then obviously hoisting that trophy is just a huge accomplishment. But also something that's kind of overlooked with this is that the Magic were in their infancy of a franchise and they were able to go to the NBA Finals. I mean, obviously they had Shaq, they had Penny Hardaway, they had Nick Anderson. I mean, just having an extremely young core and some veterans sprinkled in and be able to go on a run like that is very, very successful for
that's just another season where not only because of what you just said about the Magic being in their infancy and making the finals with a great young roster in Penny and Shaq, but just having another NBA season without Michael Jordan, with having that finals really up for grabs and the Rockets cementing themselves as undoubtedly, in my opinion, the second greatest team to come out of those 90s era NBA teams, because unless Michael Jordan was in the league, it was going to be the Rockets who were going to win the series. So just really great Rockets team.
Yeah. I'm gonna go into hockey right now. I'm going to talk about a team. They didn't win the Stanley Cup, but I'm going to talk about in 2018 the Golden Knights.
Yeah.
Their first season ever as a franchise, and they were able to go to the Stanley Cup Finals. Obviously, they lost to the Washington Capitals in I think it was 5 games, I believe. But just being able to go there as their first year as a franchise is just so crazy to me. I mean, you get a lot of players in the expansion draft. They were able to get kind of a good core for a young team. They were able to get James Neal and Marc-Andre Fleury, who previously won Stanley Cups with the Penguins. but obviously they got rid of him because Matt Murray was kind of an emerging star at the goalie position. But even though they lost this, it's just really a great accomplishment. But then also another storyline with the Stanley Cup, Alex Ovechkin was able to win his first Stanley Cup.
Yep.
A lot of people talked about who's the best hockey player in the world right now. Is it Sidney Crosby or Alex Ovechkin? Crosby obviously was able to. He had 3 rings, and Crosby had 0. So I mean, it was kind of no question. But then being able to see Ovechkin win this Stanley Cup, was awesome to see. And then obviously after the Stanley Cup, he kind of went on an extremely large bender, I would assume.
Yeah. No, certainly. But I mean, the 2018 Vegas Golden Knights is just such an incredible season that, like you said, it's going to go down in history. I mean, going into the season, they were the first major sports team to ever be relocated to Las Vegas. And for that reason, they were kind of a laughing stock in the sports world. Oh, this team's going to be in Las Vegas. How many legitimate fans are the Las Vegas Golden Knights going to have? How legitimate of an organization is this Las Vegas Golden Knights team going to be? I mean, they're operating out of Las Vegas. Are their players going to stay out of trouble? So many questions surrounding the Vegas Golden Knights and just Vegas as a sports city in general. And for them to enjoy the strongest debut season for an expansion team in really North American professional sports history, the only team I can even think of that's even close to this level of success that the Knights experienced is the 1995 Jaguars, who also had a very good season. But I mean, I don't think an expansion team in any major sports league will ever go to their respective finals in their respective sport ever again. And the Vegas Golden Knights to be, 3 games away from hoisting the Stanley Cup when some teams haven't even done that yet is just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and then also the big storyline, Capitals winning their first cup, Ovechkin winning their first cup, but kind of leading up to the Stanley Cup, the Capitals, they had a huge run in the playoffs. I mean, they were down 2-0 against the Blue Jackets, and they came back in that series. Then the next round, they played the Penguins, who defeated them 2 years in a row prior to this Stanley Cup run, and then the Eastern Conference Finals, they beat the Lightning in 7 games. So it was no cakewalk for these Capitals, and it just showed how resilient they really were and how thirsty Ovechkin was to winning a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, again, Alex Ovechkin is one of those players like a Clayton Kershaw, you could say, and like a Dan Marino, where they're respected as one of the greatest athletes in their sport history at their position, and to have never won a championship when those players end up winning a championship. In Dan Marino's case, that wasn't the case, never end up winning a championship, but it's so important for Alex Ovechkin to win a championship because we see in every GOAT discussion, championships are the first thing that come up. So there's no GOAT discussion in hockey or just no Mount Rushmore discussion for Alex Ovechkin until he did win that Stanley Cup. So when he did win that Stanley Cup, that really thrust him into a position where we can talk about him as not the greatest NHL player to ever live, but one of them.
Yeah, and obviously that year he won the Rocky Richard Trophy for most goals. So, just being one of the best goal scorers of all time and capping it off with the Stanley Cup, it's just awesome.
Yep. So getting into another hockey team that I think has a very significant championship is going to be the 1994 New York Rangers. Going into that season, they haven't won the Stanley Cup since the year 1940, and I know they were kind of a laughing stock for not winning a Stanley Cup for that long. Teams would always chant 1940, 1940 in their arena every single time they would play another team, and just a great season for those Rangers teams. But going down into the playoffs in the Eastern Conference Finals, they were down 3-2 in the series, and Marc Messier ended up guaranteeing a Game 6 victory before the game. So all that media pressure, being in New York, having your best player guarantee a victory, and then him going out that game and having a hat trick, that's just an incredible storyline. They ended up surviving that series, coming back, and surviving another great Game 7 series in the Stanley Cup versus the Vancouver Canucks to really just break that New York drought for the Stanley Cup in terms of the Rangers organization, and for them just to win is also very significant.
Yeah, I mean, before I get into the Rangers, I kind of just want to touch upon the Canucks because they also went on an insane playoff run. They were the 7th seed going into the playoffs. The first round, they were down 3-1 against the Calgary Flames, and they were able to win 3 in a row. And all 3 of those games were an overtime game. So, I mean, being at one of those games must have been awesome, an awesome experience. And then they upset the Stars and the Maple Leafs in the following rounds. But then, the Rangers were destined to win that Stanley Cup. I mean, they had the league's best record.
Yep.
They had Mark Messier, and then they had 7 other players from the Oilers, so they had a lot of championship pedigree on their roster because the Oilers kind of in the 80s and the beginning of the 90s were able to put together dynasties. But just a player like Mark Messier, the captain, guaranteeing a victory and then kind of just putting the city on his back and winning Game 6 for them. And then also he had a game-winning goal in Game 7 as well, and just awesome moments. I mean, there's great moments in that playoff run for the Rangers. Obviously, there's a very famous image of Mark Messier holding the Stanley Cup trophy in excitement at the end of the series, and then the previous round before in double overtime against the Devils, my New Jersey Devils, sadly. I don't know how to pronounce his first name, but Meto on the Rangers scored a double overtime goal, which is one of the greatest sports calls of all time. If you haven't heard it, you should definitely check it out. But just a really insane run for the Rangers, but also that summer as a New York fan was also awesome because obviously the Knicks were in the NBA Finals as well. Sadly, they lost, but being able to, as a New York sports fan, be able to watch one night, watch the Rangers, the next night flip the channel and you got the Knicks on. I mean, New York. A lot of people call New York the mecca of sports, but there's not a lot of success going on in New York despite being called the mecca of sports. But having both your hockey team and your NBA team in the finals at the same time is an awesome thing that happened. And also, obviously, they share the same arena too.
Yeah, I mean, Madison Square Garden, one of the most notoriously great sports arena in all of the world. I mean, 1994, that summer was really the pinnacle of Madison Square Garden with the Rangers and their basketball team, the New York Knicks, being in the finals. Not only that, you had a former great New York athlete, O.J. Simpson, who played for the Buffalo Bills, of course, having that huge Bronco car chase, all while their 2 New York teams are in the finals. So talk about a great storyline. You had 3 major U.S. events going on at the same time, really all during this great Rangers run.
Yeah. And then I'll go into another championship run, but obviously these Rangers had a 54-year drought. So obviously a lot of teams have droughts, and I think that's kind of another criteria. You have like the wild card underdogs, and then you have kind of the huge drought. Mm-hmm. I mean, they might fit into the underdog category, but also kind of like a Venn diagram, I guess you can say.
Yeah.
But you have the 2016 Cubs winning the World Series, kind of the biggest drought in all of sports. It was 108 years, I believe. The last time they won was 1908. They were down 3-1. No one thought they were going to win. The year before, they lost in the NLCS to the Mets. So everybody, as a Cubs fan, you're probably like, we're never going to win. How we the league's best record, and now we're down 3-1 in the World Series. And Cubs fans were probably like, oh, the curse of the Billy Goat, which is, by the way, it's kind of like one of the worst curse names of all time.
Yeah, it is.
No, like the curse of the Billy Goat must be true, but obviously they were able to come back 3-1, winning Game 7 in the 10th inning at a game that ended at 12 o'clock because there was a rain delay as also extra innings. So it's just an awesome thing for the Cubs to. And I mean, you have those moments. You have Chris Bryant smiling as he's getting the final ground ball to win the World Series. Just awesome moments and a great run for the Cubs in that season.
Yeah, I mean, another series, too. Just a great series. I mean, obviously, it went to 7 games, and they ended up winning in 7 games. But for a Cleveland Indians team, they also had a great storyline going into that World Series, too. Obviously, they had more success in terms of their MLB franchise than the Chicago Cubs had. But they had also, in the city of Cleveland, had also had a huge sports drought going into that year as well, having their team also in the NBA Finals a couple of months later. So that was just a great time to be a Cleveland sports fan. But I mean, the road team in that series won 5 out of the 7 games. So just a nail biter every single game, game in and game out, to be a home team and a home team fan to go to your stadium and root hard for your team. And 5 out of those 7 games they lost. I mean, that's just incredible. Huge win for pop culture too, as obviously the Chicago Cubs were set to win the World Series and Back to the Future in 2016. So for them to win it as well, that was pretty crazy.
The sports almanac that Biff Tanner stole.
Yep, he became very rich off of.
So kind of I mean, obviously there's hundreds and hundreds of years of championships for each league.
Yep.
And another one that comes up to mind for me personally, I mean, a recent one for basketball was most notably last year's.
Yep.
I mean, you have the Warriors with their 5th finals appearance in a row. I mean, something that doesn't really happen. I mean, you have the Celtics in the 60s going to, I don't know how many it was in a row. I think it might have been 8 or 6, something like that.
Yep.
Obviously, you have the Warriors having dominance. They had Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond. They added DeMarcus Cousins at the beginning of the season. They had KD as well. So obviously, people like the Warriors, no question about it, are going to win this series. And then you just have the Raptors going on one of the great playoff runs in modern sports history and being able to win in 6 games.
Yeah, obviously you have a lot of injuries sustained by the Warriors that season. DeMarcus Cousins was injured for most of that season, and when he came back, he wasn't up to his full form. You have Klay Thompson tearing his ACL in that series. Then you have Kevin Durant being banged up for most of the playoffs, in and out with an Achilles injury, coming back for 12 minutes. The best player on the court, without a doubt, for those 12 minutes that he played in that game, and then ended up tearing his Achilles. So major injuries by the Warriors. Nonetheless, the Raptors the city of Toronto had a sports drought since 1993, which isn't too long compared to some of the other sports droughts we got into, but it was Toronto's first NBA championship, so just that organization had never won a championship. So, I mean, they were down 0-2 to the Bucks as well in the Eastern Conference Finals. They're the 6th team ever to come back from an 0-2 series deficit. They ended up winning the next 4 games. One of the greatest just playoff runs by an individual player ever in Kawhi Leonard. I know he's top 5 in terms of points scored in a playoff ever. So just absolutely, again, great storyline going into that series and just a great series.
Yeah, and I mean, you have one of the most famous shots of all time in recent memory with Kawhi nailing that game winner in Game 7 against the 76ers in the second round of the playoffs. I mean, the Raptors kind of took a risk getting Kawhi. They traded away DeMar DeRozan. I don't know how to say the other guy's name, but it was a center. And they also got Danny Green in exchange with Kawhi, but just kind of putting all their chips on the table and saying, let's make this run right here and let's do it. Because they didn't know the future of Kawhi on their team, but obviously they were able to capture that championship. And
and I mean, just the Raptors, and this is why Ujiri is one of the great GMs for the Raptors, is because, I mean, he really just took a risk in seeing that he's had great Raptors teams the last 5 years. These teams have been the first seed in the East, but every single year they hit a wall that is a LeBron James, and they just really haven't been able to capture magic come playoff time. Kyle Lowry, very well documented to be very bad in the playoffs, and same with DeMar DeRozan, but to really just put all of his chips on the table and say, we can get a great player who hasn't even played really the past 2 seasons. So even Kawhi Leonard was a really great storyline going into that season because he was kind of mystical, not only in terms of personality, but we hadn't seen him play basketball in a very long time. and just his camp coming out and saying, I do want to play for LA, I want to play for the Lakers, or I want to play for the Clippers. And even with all that said, even with Kawhi's camp really strongly suggesting that they aren't going to come back to Toronto for the next season, for them, in spite of that, to have a 1-year championship window with a great player, to seize that opportunity, trade for some great players down the road, such as Marc Gasol, and end up winning the series. I mean, that's one of the greatest gambles in NBA history and one of the best gambles that paid off in NBA history.
Yeah, and like you talked about, that David Blatt was fired by the Cavs at midseason. I mean, these Raptors fired Dwayne Casey at the beginning of the year, who the year before won Coach of the Year. So they were just kind of getting a whole 180 of their team image, and they were able to culminate it with a NBA championship.
Yeah, really incredible that Kawhi Leonard, despite winning the championship, still didn't come back the next season. And we saw this season, before the season, because of Corona, came to a halt. I mean, still a great Raptors team that are going to be a threat in the Eastern Conference Finals, or in the Eastern Conference, I should say, this upcoming season and seasons to come. So it really cemented the Raptors as a great organization in the 2010s and going into the 2020s. They just had players in the 2010 who really couldn't get them over the hump, but they've always had great coaches and a great front office, and to finally have the personnel to win a championship and do it in their first year of having that personnel is just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, with that playoff run, you saw the emergence of Siakam, Fred VanVleet. I mean, Kyle Lowry he played better in this.
Yeah, he did.
Because previous years in the playoffs, it was kind of the weight was on him and DeMar, but having someone like Kawhi on his team, the weight was kind of all on Kawhi's shoulder. And Kawhi, obviously one of the best postseason performers of all time, winning Finals MVP with the Spurs. So obviously the weight is on his shoulder and he can handle it. So Kyle Lowry can kind of take a breather and go back to the way he can play without choking.
Yeah, really incredible. Little small anecdote and storyline in that series too, with Serge Ibaka being the second player in that old Thunder team to win a championship. If you went back and told me in 2012, right after the Oklahoma City Thunder lost to the Heat for LeBron's first championship, if you told me that only two of these players would end up winning NBA championships, who would they be? I probably would not say Serge Ibaka in that sentence, but obviously Kevin Durant won it before Serge, and then we have Serge Ibaka. So pretty interesting to think about Serge Ibaka being an NBA champion and Russell Westbrook and James Harden not being an NBA champion.
And then obviously this was kind of it was kind of the breaking up of the Warriors. I mean, they still have their core three of Clay, Steph, and Draymond, but they lost KD to the Nets the year after, and I mean, just one of the great runs by the Raptors. I mean, it's kind of a lot of people won't talk about it as one of the best playoff runs of all time, but I really like talking about this Raptors one.
Yeah, me too. And a great point you just made at the end there is that you could officially mark the 2019 Raptors as the end of the first Warriors dynasty, if maybe the only Warriors dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, also, we can talk about another game after this, but I just want to say one quick point that kind of the writing was on the wall with this team. You saw Draymond and Kevin Durant continuously had some arguments on the bench and kind of locker room arguments as well, just talking about where KD was going to leave, or when he was going to leave, or where he was going to go to, and not having like his head with the Warriors in the current state that they were in.
Yeah, everybody said after that really major documented argument they had on the side of the bench, I believe Draymond Green got a rebound, dribbled out the clock, and just made a really bad mistake at the end of the game where Kevin Durant was clapping for the ball, screaming for the ball, didn't get the ball, and he went up to Draymond and said, "You need to give me the ball in that situation." And Draymond, being Draymond, kind of snapped at him and just started going off on him. And everybody, even Kevin Durant, looking back at that situation, said right after that, no matter what happened that season, I wasn't going back to the Warriors. So huge storyline in that season too, with the end of that short Kevin Durant era of Warriors basketball.
Yeah, so you want to go into one more? We'll go into one more championship, and which one do you want to talk about? Which is a major one that sticks out to you?
Yeah, and I saved this one for last because it's arguably the most significant one. I think you can make the argument that it is the most significant just championship in sports history, being a major sports town and having a major sports team not win for 86 years. And that's going to be the 2004 Red Sox, just magical run. Obviously, they had an 86-year curse of the Great Bambino curse when they dealt Babe Ruth to the Yankees. I mean, if this curse was real, we could see the Boston Red Sox with 27 World Series championships, and with the Yankees have an 86-year drought if Babe Ruth was never dealt from the Red Sox to the Yankees. So, I mean, just ever since then, the Yankees have had the upper hand on the Red Sox, and really the Red Sox have just struggled for 86 years to even win a World Series, as they never did. I mean, really, to think about a Red Sox team that is so great, but they had an 86-year curse is just absolutely incredible. They ended up that year, which was a pattern for, again, 86 years. They finished 3 games behind the Yankees, so the Yankees had their number all season. I think they tied their regular season games in the regular season, but I mean, both great teams. They ended up facing the Yankees in the ALCS, and they fell 0-3 in the series. And in Game 3, they lost by the most amount of points scored in an ALCS game in MLB history, and losing 19-8. So, I mean, to have a 86-year curse to an organization, to be down 0-3 to that same organization, and to lose and giving up 19 runs in Game 3, going into Game 4, down 0-3. I mean, all the cards are stacked against you. I can't imagine just having the will and the fight to not only win Game 4, down in the 9th inning in Game 4, down 1 run with Mariano Rivera, who's one of the greatest closers in MLB history and the last player to wear number 42. I mean, to end up winning that game in extra innings on the back of, I'm blanking on David Ortiz, and then to end up having an iconic game, that Game 6 with Curt Schilling's bloody sock game, where he allowed only 1 run in 7 innings to just come back from an 0-3 deficit, which has never been done, not only in MLB history, but in most sports leagues teams' history, to be the first team to really do that and to end up winning that series 4-3 decisively in Game 7, winning 10-3. And end up sweeping the St. Louis Cardinals, who were the best team in the MLB that season. But, I mean, the Red Sox had all the momentum in the world, winning 4 games straight against the Yankees, breaking the curse, getting through. I mean, I think that's one of the greatest championship runs in sports history.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of the year, the Red Sox kind of got a new face for their team. They hired Terry Francona as their manager. They traded for Curt Schilling. So they're trying to get a new identity for their roster, but I mean, throughout the whole year, they played the Yankees really tough. You have that really famous brawl between A-Rod and Jason Varitek. I mean, really, those teams hate each other. I think that was kind of one of the peaks of their hatred between those two teams, and then obviously winning 4 in a row against the Yankees. I mean, I think for the Red Sox, they swept the Cardinals, so I feel like it was obviously winning the World Series is a great accomplishment, but I think beating those Yankees was kind of more of a sweet moment for those players on that team because they were able to get over that hump of a team that was so dominant throughout their whole history of an organization, and they were able to beat the team that they traded Babe Ruth to and start the curse of the Bambino.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, obviously one of the most well-documented sports rivalries in sports history. For both of those teams to be great in the early 2000s was not only really great for baseball, but great for those two organizations to really battle it out. And like you said, their World Series was in the ALCS when they did beat the Yankees. I mean, again, just to come down 0-3, have some of the most memorable moments in MLB history. You said that brawl. I mean, they had to clear both sides because the fans in the stadium were throwing baseballs and things of that nature onto the field. And having that famous moment where Alex Rodriguez slapped the ball out of the baseman's glove. I mean, just so many significant moments in that series, and to go on and sweep the best team in the MLB that season is just very significant. And I mean, in 2 series in a row, franchise in MLB history, and then to beat the second greatest franchise in MLB history, just in terms of history, again, ending the great Bambino curse is just really significant.
Yeah, I think even if they're playing like the MLB All-Stars in the World Series, I think they were going to win no matter what. They were just riding that so much momentum that they were going to win regardless.
Certainly.
Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We had a lot of fun researching different championships, even for the ones that we weren't kind of alive or too young to remember. But let us know what you guys think is the best championship runs of all time or championship performances. But we really hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you in the next episode.